Poor girl texted the CEO by mistake, asking for money to buy baby formula. The sound of her baby's hungry cries pierced through the thin walls of their apartment as Zoe stared at her phone in horror. The text she'd just sent begging for money wasn't to her friend Amber, it had gone to a number she didn't recognize. What Zoe didn't know was that fate had just connected her to someone who would change her life forever, but not before putting her through the most humiliating experience of her existence. Zoe Morgan was down to her last $5 and her 6-month-old daughter hadn't eaten in hours. The formula shortage had hit their neighborhood hard, and the one can she managed to find cost $40, money she simply didn't have. As a single mom working 2 minimum-wage jobs, she was drowning in debt after her ex disappeared, leaving her with nothing but broken promises and mounting bills. When her phone suddenly pinged with a response, she never expected to see, "Who is this and why are you asking me for money?" Little did she know, her desperate text had reached Blake Harrison, the notoriously cold-hearted CEO of Harrison Enterprises, a man known for destroying careers with a single word. And he was about to show up at her door. "I don't do handouts," Blake said, his expensive cologne filling Zoe's tiny apartment as he surveyed the space with judgment in his eyes. His tailored suit probably cost more than her rent, and his presence made her feel smaller than she already did. "I never meant to text you," Zoe replied, her voice barely above a whisper as she clutched her daughter Emma tighter. "I was trying to reach my friend. Yet here I am," he said coldly, "because something about your message seemed different from the usual scams." His eyes softened slightly when Emma's tiny hand reached toward him. "Where's the baby's father?" "Gone," Zoe said, the word hanging heavy between them. "Left when I told him I was pregnant." Blake's jaw tightened. Something in his expression shifted, a flash of recognition that disappeared as quickly as it came. "I'll pay for the formula," he said finally. "This once. And then we're done." But as he turned to leave, Emma started crying again, and Blake froze in the doorway. The sound seemed to trigger something deep within him, something buried beneath years of calculated business decisions and emotional walls. What Zoe couldn't possibly know was that Blake Harrison had his own painful history with abandoned children, one that would soon force him to confront the man he'd become. 3 weeks later, Zoe was stocking shelves at her night job when her manager approached with a strange expression. "There's someone here to see you," he said. "Says he's your boss?" Blake Harrison stood in the employee break room, looking completely out of place among the vending machines and plastic chairs. But what shocked Zoe wasn't his presence, it was the baby carrier in his hand, filled with formula, diapers, and a business card with his personal number. "My assistant found something interesting," he said without preamble. "Your ex-boyfriend? He works for one of my subsidiaries. Apparently, he's been telling everyone he's childless." Zoe felt her knees weaken. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm firing him tomorrow," Blake said, his voice dangerously soft. "And I'm offering you a job. One that pays actual living wages." Their eyes met across the room, and for the first time, Zoe saw something in his gaze that looked remarkably like compassion. But could she trust this man who represented everything she'd been taught to resent? What she didn't realize was that Blake Harrison had recognized in her something he'd spent years searching for, and their connection was about to become much more complicated than employer and employee. "You can't just waltz into my life and try to fix everything," Zoe snapped, standing in Blake's penthouse office 3 months later. "I'm not your charity case." "Is that what you think this is?" Blake asked, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. The ruthless businessman the world knew had slowly revealed another side to Zoe, one that laughed at Emma's antics and brought soup when Zoe caught the flu. "Then what is it?" she challenged. Blake moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You texted a stranger asking for help to feed your daughter. Do you know what that did to me? It reminded me that I used to be human before I became." He gestured around his opulent office. "This. I never asked you to change," Zoe whispered. "You didn't have to," he replied, his voice breaking slightly. "Emma did that just by existing. And you did it by showing me what real strength looks like. When his hand touched hers, the electricity between them was undeniable. But as their lips nearly met, Blake's phone rang. His board of directors was threatening to remove him as CEO for his recent, soft, decisions, including the affordable housing project he'd started in Zoe's neighborhood. Everything he'd built was at risk, and he had to make a choice between the empire he'd created and the heart he'd just rediscovered. 6 months after that fateful text message, Zoe stood beside Blake at the grand opening of Harrison Family Foundation's first community center, which offered free childcare for working parents. Emma, now walking with wobbly steps, clutched both their hands between them. "You gave up everything," Zoe said quietly as cameras flashed around them. Blake smiled, the genuine kind that had become more frequent lately. "I gave up what didn't matter to keep what does." He'd lost his position as CEO but retained enough shares to fund what truly fulfilled him, creating opportunities for families like the one he'd never had growing up in foster care. As they cut the ribbon together, Blake knelt down to Emma's level. "Your mom sent a text message that changed my life," he told her. "She taught me that family isn't about where you come from, it's about who you choose to love." When he stood and finally kissed Zoe, the cheers around them faded into background noise. Their journey hadn't been easy, trust came slowly, and healing took time, but the family they'd created was stronger for having weathered the storms together. "Not bad for a wrong number," Zoe whispered against his lips. Blake's answer was simple, it was exactly the right number. "I just didn't know I was waiting for it." If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that remind us that sometimes our biggest mistakes lead to our greatest blessings. From which country are you watching? Let me know in the comments below.